The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the hospital room, but nothing could cleanse the weight of the words hanging in the air. Chief Olabode Durojaiye, a man who had built an empire from the ground up, sat frozen in his hospital bed, gripping the crisp white sheets. Stage 4, liver cancer, terminal, 6 months at most. Dr. Adebayo's voice was steady, but the words pierced like a dagger. Sir, I'm afraid the prognosis is clear. You've got less than 6 months to live. We've done all we can. Olabode's hands clenched into fists. Number this. This can't be true, he muttered. I feel fine. There must be some mistake. Dr. Adebayo adjusted his glasses, looking at him with a kind but firm expression. We ran the test twice, sir. The cancer is widespread. It's too late for treatment. Olabode's mind raced. At 58, he had everything: wealth, power, respect. But no heir, no one to carry on his legacy. His vast business empire, his fortune, his name, all of it would soon be swallowed by greedy relatives and opportunists. The thought of dying without passing on what he had built left him feeling cold and empty. Isn't there anything you can do? Anything? Olabode pleaded. We can manage the pain, make you comfortable, the doctor replied. I don't want comfort, Olabode roared, slamming his fist on the bed. I want a cure. The doctor remained silent, his face tight with professional restraint. Olabode's breath came in short, ragged gasps. For the first time in decades, he felt powerless. He had spent his life in control, commanding boardrooms, making deals, intimidating the wealthiest men in the country. But now, death had a grip on him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Pamela, his trusted nurse, stepped into the room. She had worked for him for years, but never had she seen him like this. The usual commanding presence he had was absent. Instead, he sat in his bed, looking small, vulnerable. Chief Olabode, are you okay? She asked softly, her voice gentle and concerned. He snapped out of his trance and looked at her, his face pale, his eyes clouded with fear. Do I look okay, Pamela? His voice was bitter. I just got back from the hospital and they told me I have 6 months to live. Pamela's hand flew to her mouth in shock. No, that can't be true. You're so strong, so full of life. Apparently, cancer doesn't care how strong I am, Olabode muttered bitterly. He leaned forward, rubbing his temples, exhausted. I have no one, Pamela. No one to carry on my legacy. No heir. My empire will be lost to greedy relatives. I need someone, but who? Who can help me? Pamela hesitated, stepping closer. Sir, is there anything I can do? Anything? Olabode's eyes locked with hers, a sudden desperation flooding his gaze. Yes, Pamela, he said, his voice breaking. I need an heir, someone to carry on my name, my legacy. He paused, his breath uneven. And I want you to give me that child. Pamela's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded, and for a moment, everything around her went silent. What? She whispered, barely able to process his words. He looked at her, his gaze intense. I don't have time, Pamela. 6 months. I need an heir. You're the only one I trust. Please, help me. Her mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what he was asking. But why me? You've been with me for years, Olabode said softly, his voice pleading. You're loyal, hardworking, and kind. I trust you more than anyone else. You're the only one who can help me with this. Pamela's heart raced. She had never expected this, never imagined that her relationship with him would lead to this. She had always admired Olabode, but this was beyond comprehension. I don't know, she stammered. Why me, sir? I don't understand. Olabode's eyes softened. Because you're the only person I can trust. You're kind. And I know you would care for the child. I don't need you to love me, Pamela. I just need you to carry my child. It's the only way my name, my legacy will continue. Pamela stepped back, her mind racing. This was madness. Her whole life had been built on values of purity and modesty. This was something she could never have imagined. Yet here she was, being asked to give up everything she believed in for a dying man's wish. "Sir, I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice shaking. Olabode's expression darkened with desperation. "Please, Pamela, I'm begging you." The man who had never begged for anything in his life, the billionaire who had everything, was now pleading with her. Could she refuse him? Could she turn away from the man who had taken care of her family, given her opportunities? Could she give him this final wish? The silence between them grew thick. Pamela stood there, her mind reeling, unsure of what to do. Olabode was dying, and all he wanted was one last chance to leave a legacy. Would she be the one to... The sun had set, casting long shadows across the grand mansion. Chief Olabode Durojaiye sat in his plush leather armchair, staring out at the city skyline through the massive windows of his study. His once steady hands now trembled, a sign of the illness that had claimed control of his body. He was alone, his thoughts clouded by the conversation he had had earlier with Pamela. "I need you to have my child." The words echoed in his mind, replaying over and over like a broken record. He had never asked for anything like this in his life, but now, with death knocking at his door, he had no choice. Time was running out. His empire, built with sweat and blood, would be lost if he didn't act quickly. He needed someone to carry on his name, his legacy, and Pamela, his trusted nurse, was the only one he could turn to. Olabode had known Pamela for years. She had worked for him loyally, never once betraying his trust. She had taken care of him during the worst of his illness, and he had grown to rely on her in ways he never imagined. But this was something else entirely. He had never expected to ask her for such an intimate, life-changing favor. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was Pamela. She had been avoiding him since their conversation earlier in the day. He wasn't surprised. He knew what he had asked was outrageous. But he couldn't stop. He needed her. He answered the phone, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Pamela," he said, his tone firm. "I need to see you. It's important." There was a brief pause before she replied, her voice soft and hesitant. "Sir, I don't know if I can do this. What you're asking, it's too much." Olabode sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I know it's a lot to ask, but please, Pamela, you're the only person I trust. I don't have time. The doctors gave me 6 months. I can't die without leaving something behind." Pamela didn't respond right away. He could hear her breathing through the phone, the weight of his request heavy on her. He knew she was struggling with the decision. Hell, he was struggling too. But he had no other choice. "Sir, Pamela began, her voice cracking. "I don't know if I can. This goes against everything I've believed in, my values, my family, everything. I've never thought of you in that way. You're like a father to me." Olabode's heart sank at her words. He had known this would be difficult, but he hadn't anticipated just how much it would affect her. Pamela had always been kind, patient, and professional. She had never seen him as anything other than her employer. And now, he was asking her to give up everything for him. "I know, Pamela," he said softly. "I never thought I'd be in this position either, but I'm dying and I don't have much time left. I need you to help me leave something behind. You're the only one who can." Another silence hung between them, thick and uncomfortable. Pamela was clearly torn, unsure of what to do. Olabode pressed on, his voice growing more urgent. "Please, Pamela, I'm begging you. You don't have to love me. I don't need anything from you except for you to bear my child. I can make sure you're taken care of for the rest of your life. You and the child will never want for anything." Pamela's breath hitched, and for a moment, Olabode thought she was going to refuse. But then, she spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know if I can do this, sir," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I can't watch you die alone. You've given me and my family so much. If this is the only way to help you..." Olabode felt a rush of relief flood through him, but it was quickly tempered by guilt. He wasn't proud of what he was asking. He had never thought he would end up begging anyone for something so personal, but he had no other choice. "Thank you, Pamela," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't know what this means to me." Pamela let out a shaky breath. "I don't know what happens next, but I'll do it. For you." The line went silent as Olabode absorbed her words. He had won, at least for now. But deep down he knew the consequences of his request would weigh heavily on both of them. Pamela would never be the same after this, and neither. The days that followed were filled with a mix of uncertainty and quiet tension. Chief Olabode had asked her to bear his child, and Pamela had reluctantly agreed. But she couldn't shake the weight of her decision. The very thought of what she was about to do, what he had asked of her, was almost too much to process. Pamela had always been a woman of integrity. Raised in a home where values like purity and respect were held in the highest regard, this request seemed like an impossible choice. She had worked for Chief Olabode for 6 years, faithfully taking care of him, managing his appointments, and tending to his needs. He was a father figure to her, but this was beyond comprehension. Pamela stood in front of the mirror in her small bedroom, her heart racing. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the simple dress she had worn to work that day. "What am I doing?" she thought to herself, staring at her reflection. She barely recognized the woman in front of her. She was no longer just a nurse or a maid. She was about to be a mother, one who would carry the legacy of a man who was not her husband. The decision to do this weighed heavily on her. Every night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, torn between the responsibility she felt for Chief Olabode's request and the moral boundaries she had spent her entire life upholding. But as the days dragged on, Pamela's resolve wavered. His words, his desperation, and the promise of financial security clouded her judgment. She had never imagined herself in this situation, never thought that her life would come to this point. That evening, Pamela found herself in the grand study, staring at Chief Olabode from across the room. He was sitting behind his massive desk, papers scattered before him, but his eyes were distant, as if the weight of his impending death had finally taken a toll on his once commanding presence. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he had aged in just a few short months since his diagnosis. "You're here?" Olabode's voice broke the silence, soft yet filled with anticipation. He looked at her, his face tired but hopeful. Pamela nodded silently, stepping forward. She had promised herself that she wouldn't go back on her word, that she would follow through, no matter how difficult it was. But standing there, looking into his eyes, she couldn't deny the wave of emotion that flooded through her. "Are you sure about this, Pamela?" Olabode's voice trembled slightly, his gaze intense. "I don't want you to feel pressured. I need you to be sure." Pamela took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come this far. She couldn't turn back now. "I've made my decision, sir," she said softly, her voice steady, despite the storm inside her. "I'll do it. For you. For the legacy." A strange mix of relief and guilt washed over Olabode's face. He stood up from his chair, slowly, and took a step toward her. His presence, despite his weakening condition, was still commanding. "I don't know how to thank you, Pamela," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're giving me a chance at something I never thought I'd have again." Pamela nodded, though her heart ached. She could feel the weight of his gratitude, but at the same time, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. This wasn't just about a child or a legacy. It was about a man at the end of his life, desperate for control in a world that had slipped away from him. "Are you sure?" Olabode asked again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir," Pamela answered, her eyes meeting his. "I'm sure." For a moment, they just stood there, staring at each other. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the unspoken emotions that neither of them could quite articulate. Pamela had made her choice, but deep inside, she couldn't help but wonder what the consequences would be. She had already given herself to him in a way she had never imagined, and now, as they stood on the edge of a decision that would change everything, she realized just how much this would cost her. The next day, Pamela found herself in a private clinic, sitting in front of a doctor who had been briefed on the situation. The sterile room was quiet, with only the soft hum of medical equipment to break the silence. "We can proceed with artificial insemination if that's your preference," the doctor said, flipping through the notes. "But if you'd like to go a more natural route—" Pamela shook her head. "I'll do it the way he wants, the natural way." The doctor nodded, though his eyes betrayed a hint of concern. "This is a big decision, and it's not something we take lightly. You're giving up a lot. You're going to need support." "I have support," Pamela said quietly, her mind already elsewhere. She wasn't sure if that was entirely true, but she couldn't afford to think about it now. The doctor paused, studying her face. "If you change your mind at any point—" The days passed slowly for Pamela. Every moment seemed heavy with the weight of her decision. She had agreed to Chief Olabode's request, but every time she looked at him, every time they were alone in a room together, the enormity of her choice settled in. She was carrying his child, not out of love, not because she wanted to, but because she had felt a deep sense of obligation to him. Her mind was clouded with questions. Could she really follow through with this? Could she live with the consequences of giving herself to a man she had always seen as a father figure? The thought that she was about to become pregnant with his child, a child that would carry his name, was both unsettling and powerful. As the weeks went by, she found herself spending more and more time in the mansion, attending to Olabode's needs and trying to maintain some semblance of normality. His condition was deteriorating, though. Despite his wealth and influence, the once indomitable billionaire was now weaker than ever, his life slipping away and his dependency on her growing stronger. Pamela had always known that Chief Olabode's empire was vast, but she had never truly understood the loneliness that came with being at the top. Now, she could see it clearly. He was terrified, not of death itself, but of dying without a legacy, without someone to carry on his name. His desperation to have a child to inherit everything he had built consumed him, and Pamela couldn't escape it. It was there in every conversation, in every look, in every plea he made to her. "Pamela," Olabode's voice echoed in her mind as she stood at the window of her room, gazing out at the city below. "I can't die alone, without a legacy. You're the only one I trust. You're the only one who can help me leave something behind." The words had been repeated so often that they had started to lose their meaning. Yet every time she heard them, a pang of guilt twisted inside her. She had agreed to do this, to help him. But what about her own future? What would this child mean for her? She had spent so many years building a life of her own, one that was centered around her career and family. And now, it was all being upended because of one desperate man's request. The sound of a knock at the door brought her back to reality. "Pamela?" It was Olabode's voice, filled with the same quiet desperation he had spoken with since their conversation began. Pamela took a deep breath and opened the door. There he stood, looking at her with a mixture of hope and sadness. He was no longer the powerful, commanding man he had once been. The cancer had taken its toll. His skin was pale, his body frail, and his once commanding voice was now weak. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Pamela nodded silently, stepping aside to let him in. She could see the pain in his eyes, the pain of a man who had everything but was about to lose it all. He sat on the edge of her bed, his hands clasped together as if holding on to the last thread of hope. "I've been thinking about everything," Olabode said, his voice hoarse. "About the child, about what we're doing. And I don't want you to feel like you have no choice. You don't have to do this, Pamela. I don't want you to feel trapped." Pamela swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I'm not trapped," she said, though her words felt empty. "I'm here because I want to help you, because you've done so much for me and my family. But this is more than just a favor. It's a life-changing decision." Olabode looked at her, his eyes searching hers for any sign of doubt. "I know, and I don't want you to regret it. But I'm afraid, Pamela. Afraid of dying without leaving a mark on this world. You're the only person who can give me that." The air between them felt thick, suffocating. Pamela didn't know what to say. She had already made her decision, but now, sitting in front of him, listening to his words, she felt the weight of it all. "I don't regret it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't regret helping you. But I need to know that you're not just asking me for a child to carry on your name. I need to know that you see me, that you respect me, that this isn't just about legacy, but about us." Olabode's face softened, and he reached out to take her hand. "Pamela, I respect you more than anyone. You've always been there for me, never asking for anything in return. This is my way of showing you how much I value you, how much I care for you." Pamela looked down at their intertwined hands, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard those words before, words of gratitude, of care, but there was something different in them now. Was he truly asking for her, or was he simply asking for a solution to his problems? She couldn't tell. "I want to believe you, Olabode," she said quietly, "but I'm not sure what this is." Pamela's heart raced as she stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door of Chief Olabode's study. The weight of the conversation they had just shared hung heavy in the air, the silence between them like a tangible force that neither of them could escape. She had agreed to help him, to give him the child he desperately wanted to carry on his legacy. But as the days passed, the reality of her decision began to settle in, and with it came a storm of emotions she couldn't control. She had never imagined herself in this position. A maid, no, a nurse, asked to bear the child of her employer, the very man who had treated her like family for all these years. It had seemed simple at first. She was helping him, giving him what he wanted in his final days. But now, it felt like she was losing herself in the process. The lines between right and wrong had become blurred, and every day the guilt gnawed at her, eating away at her peace of mind. Pamela had never been one to act on impulse. She was careful, thoughtful, and grounded in her beliefs. Yet now she was questioning everything, her values, her loyalty, and even the love she had for the man who had asked so much of her. She had always admired Chief Olabode, respected him, but this request? It was something entirely different. It wasn't just about bearing a child, it was about her life, her future, and the choices she had made that were beyond her control. She shook her head, trying to shake off the growing unease that had settled in her chest. The mansion had never felt so cold. The once grand hallways, filled with the echoes of wealth and power, now seemed empty, echoing with the weight of her decision. "Pamela?" The sound of his voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to find Chief Olabode standing at the end of the hallway, looking at her with a mixture of concern and something else, something that made her heart skip a beat. She had never seen him so vulnerable, so human. He was no longer the powerful, untouchable billionaire who ruled with an iron fist. Now he was just a man, lost in his own fear, grasping for control in the face of death. "I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "If you're having second thoughts, I understand. This wasn't meant to cause you any pain." Pamela's throat tightened, her emotions threatening to spill over. "I'm not having second thoughts," she said quickly, her voice a little too sharp. "It's just, this is a lot to take in." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in days. His once steely eyes, filled with determination and authority, now seemed soft, almost desperate. He was a man who had everything, wealth, respect, power, and yet, here he was, begging her for something that only she could give him. "I know it's not easy, Pamela," Olabode said, stepping closer, his voice filled with quiet urgency. "I don't want you to feel like you're doing this for me. I'm asking because I have no choice. You're the only person I trust." Pamela felt a lump form in her throat. She had heard these words before, and yet something in them still hit her hard. It wasn't just the legacy he wanted, it was something deeper, a need for connection, for something that transcended wealth and power, a need for love. "I've known you for years, Pamela," Olabode continued, his voice low, almost pleading. "You've always been there for me. I'm asking you because I can't do this alone. I don't have anyone else to turn to." The sincerity in his voice struck her harder than anything else. This wasn't just about a child. This was about a man who, despite everything he had, was facing the inevitable truth that he would die alone. "I'm not asking you to love me, Pamela," he said, his eyes searching hers. "I'm asking you to give me this, a chance to leave something behind, to have a piece of me live on." Pamela felt the weight of his words settle in her chest, and for the first time, she felt the full scope of what she had agreed to. This wasn't just a transaction. This was a moment that would change both of their lives forever. "I'll do it," Pamela whispered, her voice trembling. "I'll help you, but I need you to understand that this is not just about you. It's about me, too, about what I can live with." Olabode's eyes softened with relief. He stepped forward and gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch tender, almost reverent. "You don't have to do this for me, Pamela," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're doing this for yourself, too. For your future, for your peace of mind. You deserve to be happy, to have a life of your own." Pamela nodded, though a part of her still struggled to fully comprehend the gravity of her decision. She had promised herself she would never lose herself in this, but as she stood in his embrace, she realized that she had already crossed a line. The following days were filled with a heavy silence. Pamela had agreed to Chief Olabode's request, but as she spent time in his presence, she realized how much her decision was slowly starting to consume her. Every time she looked at him, she saw not the powerful businessman he once was, but a dying man, desperate, vulnerable, and afraid. It made her question everything. What had she gotten herself into? Pamela had always been a woman of integrity, someone who had lived her life with clear boundaries. But now those lines had blurred, and she was unsure of where she stood. The mansion she had once found solace in now felt like a cage. The walls seemed to close in with each passing day as her mind spiraled. Could she really go through with it? Could she bear the weight of what she was about to do for a man who had everything and nothing all at once? Her daily tasks were the same: preparing his meals, ensuring his medication was on time, managing his appointments. Yet every action felt like a step closer to an inevitable future, one she had no control over. She knew that the day was coming when she would have to face him again. It was inevitable. It was late one evening when she found herself standing outside his study, her mind racing with questions she had no answers to. He had asked her to come to him, and she could feel the weight of the moment. This was no longer just about bearing his child. This was about everything that had transpired since their agreement: the secrecy, the lies, the hidden emotions that neither of them had dared to confront. With a deep breath, Pamela knocked lightly on the door. The sound was muffled by the thick wood, but she could hear him stir inside. "Come in," Olabode's voice called, his tone calm, yet laced with an undercurrent of expectation. Pamela hesitated, her hand on the door handle. She wasn't sure what she would find inside. Would it be another plea? Another desperate request that tugged at her heart? Or was this the moment when everything would change? She stepped inside, her eyes meeting Olabode's as he sat behind his desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The weight of his gaze made her pulse quicken. He had always been a man of authority, someone who commanded respect. But now, the aura of power around him had started to crumble, revealing a man who was just as human as she was, flawed, broken, and afraid of what was to come. "You're here," Olabode said, his voice gentle. "I wasn't sure if you would come." Pamela stood silently, not knowing what to say. She could feel the tension between them, the unsaid words, the fear that had begun to seep into the space they shared. She had agreed to this, but now she wasn't sure how to proceed. She didn't know what he expected from her. Was it just the child? Or was there something else that she wasn't seeing? "I came because I promised," she said quietly, her voice shaky but firm. "I agreed to help you, and I'm here to keep my word." Olabode's eyes softened as he set his glass down on the table. "I don't want to pressure you, Pamela. I've asked so much of you already, but I need you to understand that I don't have much time left. You're my only chance." Pamela felt a pang of guilt. He was right. He didn't have time. Time was running out for him. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this was about so much more than just his dying wish. This was about power, control, and the price of both. She took a step closer, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm doing this because I respect you, but it's not easy, Olabode. I didn't expect any of this." He stood up, his face serious, his hands trembling slightly. "I didn't expect this either, Pamela. But what I'm asking for isn't just a child. It's a chance. A chance for me to leave something behind, to have a piece of myself live on. You're the only one who can give that to me." Pamela swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. The truth was, she wasn't just helping him, she was becoming a part of his legacy, and that terrified her more than anything. "You're asking a lot of me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Olabode's gaze softened, and he reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. "I know. I'm sorry, but I'm asking because I need you. I need someone I can trust to carry on my name. I don't want to die alone, Pamela." She stood there for a moment, unsure of how to respond. His desperation mirrored her own fear. She had never thought she would be in this position, and yet here she was, caught between what was right and what was necessary. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "I'll help you. But you need to understand. This is not something I take lightly." Olabode's eyes brightened with relief. He reached out, pulling her into an embrace. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means." Pamela had never felt so alone. The days had blurred together in a haze of uncertainty, and with each passing moment, her resolve seemed to waver. She had promised Chief Olabode she would carry his child, but now the weight of that promise was suffocating her. The tension in the house was unbearable. Every time she walked into a room with him, she could feel the unspoken words hanging between them, the feelings they both refused to acknowledge. It wasn't just the physical strain. The constant internal battle was wearing her down. She had always prided herself on her ability to stay focused, to keep her emotions in check. But now, it was different. Every look Olabode gave her seemed to penetrate deeper, his desperation evident in his eyes. His need for control had consumed him, and now Pamela was the one paying the price. The thought of the child growing inside her, his child, made her stomach twist. She had agreed to this for one reason only, to fulfill his last wish. But now, as the days passed, she couldn't help but question her decision. She had given him what he wanted, but at what cost? Her future was no longer hers to control. It had been taken from her the moment she made that choice. She stood in the kitchen, staring at the steaming pot on the stove, the sound of her thoughts louder than the bubbling broth. Her hands trembled as she stirred, and she tried to force herself to focus. But it was hard to ignore the quiet voice in her head, telling her that she had made a mistake. "Pamela?" The voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to see Olabode standing in the doorway, his face pale. He looked exhausted, his condition deteriorating by the day, and Pamela couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She had agreed to carry his child, but she hadn't signed up for this. She hadn't signed up for watching him slowly wither away, his body ravaged by illness, all while her own life seemed to hang in the balance. "Are you okay?" Olabode's voice was soft, but there was a tinge of worry in it. She hadn't said much to him in the past few days, and he was beginning to notice the distance between them. Pamela hesitated. "I'm fine, sir," she said quietly, turning back to the stove. The words felt hollow coming from her mouth. She wasn't fine. She hadn't been fine for weeks. Olabode took a few steps forward, his eyes fixed on her. Pamela, talk to me. You haven't been yourself lately. You've been distant. She didn't know how to respond. How could she tell him the truth? How could she admit that the choice she had made was weighing on her? That she had agreed to help him, but she hadn't anticipated the emotional toll it would take on her. I'm just tired, sir, she said, her voice low. Everything is just overwhelming. Olabode's expression softened. He stepped closer to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Pamela froze at the touch, the heat of his hand seeping through the fabric of her shirt. She hadn't expected him to be so gentle, so considerate. It only made the guilt worse. You don't have to do this alone, Olabode said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. I know it's hard, but you've been so strong for me. I don't want to put any more pressure on you than I already have. Pamela swallowed hard, her throat tight. She couldn't look him in the eye. I'm doing this because I want to help you, she said, her voice cracking. But I didn't realize how much it would change things, how much it would change me. The words hung between them, heavy and thick, as Pamela fought to keep her composure. She didn't want to break down. She didn't want to show him how much this was affecting her. But it was impossible to hide the truth any longer. Olabode sighed, rubbing his hand over his face. I never meant for it to be this difficult for you. I thought I was just asking for something simple. But I know I've asked too much. I don't want to lose you. Pamela turned to face him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. She had never seen him like this before, vulnerable, fragile. The great billionaire, the man who had built an empire, was now reduced to pleading for something he couldn't have. She felt a pang of sympathy for him, but at the same time, a sense of anger flared within her. Why had he put her in this position? Why had he asked so much of her? I'm not going anywhere, sir, she said softly, wiping away a tear that had escaped. I'll stay. I'll help you. But you need to understand that this isn't easy for me. Olabode looked at her, his eyes filled with something unspoken. I understand. I just want to make sure you're okay, Pamela. I don't want to be the reason you're unhappy. Pamela stepped back, a sudden sense of clarity washing over her. She had made this decision for him, but she had to start making it for herself. It wasn't just about his legacy anymore. It was about her life, her future, and the days felt longer now. Every morning, Pamela woke up with a sense of dread settling deep in her bones. The mansion that once felt like a home now felt like a prison. She had made a promise to Chief Olabode to carry his child and help him fulfill his legacy. But with each passing day, the reality of that promise weighed heavier on her heart. She had spent years in this house, serving him, taking care of his needs, watching him build his empire from the ground up. But now, she was trapped in a world of secrets and lies, with no way out. Every time she looked at Olabode, she saw not the powerful, commanding man he once was, but a man who was desperately clinging to life, using the last of his strength to try and control what he couldn't. Pamela had been avoiding him for days, trying to keep her distance. She couldn't bear the thought of being alone with him again, knowing what he wanted from her. She had agreed, yes, but the decision had left her feeling empty, like she had lost a part of herself that she could never get back. Today, though, there was no avoiding it. She had to face him. The tension in the house had reached a breaking point, and the air between them was thick with unspoken words. She could feel it in her chest, a pressure that seemed to grow with each step she took toward his study. As she knocked on the door, her hand trembled slightly. "Come in," Olabode's voice called from the other side, firm yet tinged with something else, something she couldn't quite place. It was a tone she had never heard before. She stepped inside, her heart racing in her chest. Olabode was sitting at his desk, papers scattered in front of him, but his eyes weren't on the work. They were fixed on her, watching her every move as she closed the door behind her. "Pamela," he said softly, his voice unusually quiet. "I've been waiting for you." Pamela stood by the door, not knowing what to say. His gaze was intense, almost like he could see right through her. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. "I'm here, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Olabode stood up and walked toward her, his movements slow but deliberate. He stopped just a few feet away, his eyes still locked on hers. "I don't want you to feel like this is all one-sided, Pamela. I know you've made a great sacrifice for me, but I need to know that you're doing this because you want to, not because you feel obligated." Pamela felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't want to be here, didn't want to have this conversation, but she couldn't escape it. "I'm doing this because I agreed to help you," she said, her voice wavering. "I want to help you, but I didn't realize how much it would affect me, how much it would change things." Olabode's expression softened, and he stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. "I never wanted to cause you pain, Pamela. I never wanted to ask so much of you. But the truth is, I don't have much time left. I need you, Pamela. You're the only one who can give me what I need. You're the only one I trust." Pamela closed her eyes, trying to block out the overwhelming emotions that flooded her. She had never been so torn in her life. She had always been strong, always been able to stay focused. But this was different. "I don't know what to do anymore," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I feel like I've lost myself in all of this. I agreed to help you, but now I don't know who I am anymore." Olabode's face softened, and he stepped back, his expression one of understanding. "Pamela, I'm sorry. I never meant for you to feel like this. I know I've asked a lot, but please understand that I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for my legacy, for my child." She looked at him, his face filled with a mix of desperation and something else, something deeper. She could see the fear in his eyes, the fear of dying without leaving anything behind. It was a fear she couldn't ignore, but it didn't change the fact that she was the one who would have to bear the weight of his request. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," she whispered, her voice filled with doubt. "I don't know if I can keep going down this path. It's too much. I don't even know who I am anymore." Olabode stepped forward again, his hands reaching for her, his voice softer now. "Pamela, I need you. I can't do this without you. Please, don't leave me now." Pamela felt her resolve begin to crumble. The man standing in front of her wasn't just her employer anymore. He was a man facing death, desperately holding on to the one thing he thought could save him, his legacy. And Pamela, caught in the web of his desperation, was the only one who could help him. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, but I'm here," she said quietly. "I'm here to help you, but I need you to understand that this is taking a toll on me, too." Olabode nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I understand, Pamela. I understand more." And as they stood there, the weight of their unspoken words hanging between them, Pamela realized that this was no longer just about helping him. It was about her, too. She was giving up pieces of herself with each passing day, and no matter what happened, she would never be the same again. Thanks for listening up to this point. Help us grow by subscribing, liking, and commenting while anticipating